YouTube thumbnails have always been a very important part of branding your videos on the website. And so websites and apps always are refreshing their looks, but something that YouTube did is that the thumbnails are, they're rectangular, and you don't think anything of it because you look at what's in the rectangle, but they have decided to make the rectangles round, which basically means that the corners are now rounded. And like on its own, I think that that's a good design move, but whether you think it's a good idea or not, it's not that great in practice because YouTube has existed since 2005, and so now 17 years worth of billions of videos now have a completely different thumbnail effectively. And on most videos, it doesn't matter, but like if you go to for example, if you go to CNN's channel, they have an extra their own like red border around it. And that border is rectangular. There's no rounding. So now when you have the clash of the rounding and the squared off corners, the issue comes in where now the CNN videos don't look professionally designed. The thumbnails, they're gonna have to go back and change everything, or they just don't and they deal with it, and they just deal with YouTube making this change. Maybe they hope that YouTube reverts it, but most, because like when most websites and apps update their design, people are like, oh, that's different. I'm noticing that's different. Maybe I'm probably upset because humans don't like change, but I'm gonna forget about it in like 5 minutes. This is different though, and it just brings me to like the title of this, the Ouroboros effect. Like, consumers don't like change in their products, but you see time and time again that graphic designers are continuing to change their products, and I don't think anyone really wants it. In most cases, people are fine with the way it is. They're used to it. They know where to click, where to press to go to places. And then when things change, they're going to get confused. And sure, in most cases, they'll get used to it, but when there's something that's the same for over 14 years, and it's a fundamental shift that is completely unnecessary, I feel like there's a problem there. I feel like there's a problem that just a few dozen people that work on YouTube's graphic design, that they came to the conclusion and have now potentially affected the financial status of people that make livings off of YouTube, because now potentially they're going to have to spend time redoing the thumbnails, and it's all because these people, just a few dozen people, decided to round the corners. And it's really interesting to think of it like that, because there's only like 500,000 designers worldwide, and they determine the look of every app and website and poster and everything. But people don't care. That's what it comes down to. People don't care about new design. They just want function in most cases. They see one, they use a product, and if they like it, they use the product for the product, not for the design. So then one day when they open it, they see something changed, like, why? And the answer is because graphic designers get bored of the current design trend, and it's estimated currently, at least, that like about every 7 years, the the trend of graphic design will change. So like when the internet and computers became a big thing, design trended towards 3 dimensions. Like you got to make things look real so that people know what to click and what to press. And everyone became used to that, and things were functioning, and computers exploded in popularity. And that's how it was for a long time. But then around 2009 or 2010 or so, Microsoft decided to change the design to flat design, where it's just a few colors and there's no realism. And that was with the Windows Phone 7. And and then a few years later in 2013, that completely changed how everything looks. And the best example of that is iOS 7 changing the look of iPhones. Like that's something people still talk about, and it's remembered because like iPhones used to be super realistic. You know, you go into the notepad and you see an actual real notepad. You go into a bookshelf, you see a bookshelf. And it goes back to like, why change it? You know, like sure, if we look back, we can say, oh, that looks bad. But like the designers didn't make it look bad then. People didn't complain then. So it only changed. Like all this money and all this time gets put into making, you know, new graphics, new code, new testing to see how people react, new customer service for people getting errors and bugs, all just because a few people got bored and decided to change the look. And there's just a real push and pull, and like the designer wants change and to make things look continuously good and new because they get bored, but the consumer just wants to complete their tasks and they do not care how it looks as long as they can see their tasks. So like I just think about this and I'm thinking, should design innovation just stop? And like there's a thing from Google called material design, which is a big design language meant to unify the web and everything. But that has not been very successful, and material design is updating. Like I wrote an essay on material design in 2019, and the guidelines have completely changed only 3 years later. So it's like even if you make this system and you're the one of the biggest companies on earth and you spend all this research and time and design into designing a language that is going to unify everything, designers are going to get bored. They're going to change things up and the guidelines will change, but then some designers won't change and some will, so it stays fragmented. And it just goes back to the thumbnails, you know? A few people decided we need to round the corners because that's how everything's going. Everything's becoming rounder, everything is more gradients, it's softer, that's the current design trend. But you know, in like 7 years, who's to say they don't go back to non-rounded corners? There's nothing saying they can't. Because like the current, how your apps, how your websites, how everything looks now, in like just 3 years or so, there will be differences. And like, you know, that's for a long time I thought that was a good thing, because like, you know, as technology progresses, you need to change design to keep up with that technology. But what if that's a flawed way of thinking, and that good design is not noticeable? And that's very evident because millions of people have no idea graphic design exists. They don't think about how the YouTube layout looks. They're just like, oh, that's different. They don't think about who does it, like why does it look different? It's just, oh, it does because the big people said so. But what if it just didn't change? And what if we let people get used to a design and that was it? And we just let the design serve the function of the actual function. Because going back to the design trends, it's like good design is invisible. But now we have Microsoft and Apple going back to more, they're going towards abstract and somewhat realistic design again, and people notice that. But you don't want people to notice it. So it's a big paradox, and it's an Ouroboros eating itself, because you have someone make something look good, and the designers like it. Everyone in the design world is like, that looks cool, I'm gonna use that trend. But then you have the consumer. Like, who cares? We don't care how your design looks. Just let us use the product. So, but I guess designers need to get paid. So it's just this whole paradox of like, design will never be final unless some miracle happens where everyone decides design should stop at a point where we decide how everything looks. And that's not even something I think is a good thing at all, because humans do ultimately get bored, and even if they don't want change, the change is good. It gets people talking. Even if they hate it, some people like it. So just people will always complain. But does that mean that graphic design should end, basically? As in, like, it just becomes guidelines that you need to follow or else you're wrong? Or do we keep on this track of every 7 years your app gets a complete redesign and you don't know what's happening, and then you just get used to it and forget? I don't think there's any solution, because like, the way that graphic design is because we're human. Because like, because like, colors are interesting, making things look cool and pop out. It's like, we need that. People will just always need that change, even if ultimately it's not the best, because there is no best. That's not how this works. Design has been going for decades, and there will continue to be changes, and YouTube borders will continue to switch between straight edges and rounded edges forever, because at the time it's the best, but then it's not. But then you just affect users in such a bad way by changing something so fundamental, just so a few designers say, good job, you did what's the trend now, instead of sticking to what it is. It's just, YouTube should relook at what they've done, because even though of course it's not that serious, but it's still an interesting flaw in their design process. And I don't think it was the right move at all. And like, it's not that it looks good or it looks bad, and that's what most people complain about. This is an issue of the designer taking precedence over the consumer. And when that happens, that's gonna make people really mad. But the thing is, it probably won't change. The YouTube thumbnails will probably stay rounded, and then people will redesign stuff, and then people will have to do it again and again and again, and we're just gonna have to deal with it, because that's the way that our brains work, and it's endless. And design needs to be invisible, but design cannot be invisible because of how we work. So design just needs to fit with what's best. And I think that there needs to be a look at what is the best course for graphic design. Should we continue to go on this path of redesigning things every few months in minor or major ways? And ultimately, why do we do that? Why do we need to break it down into its fundamentals and say, can we do this better? Because right now it's snowballing into a mess of millions of different design languages hurting the user's eyes, and just it's an interesting time for design right now. And the YouTube thumbnails are now rounded on the corners, and 14 years of not having that. Just a few dozen people in Silicon Valley said, let's make them round. I feel like graphic design just needs to look into itself and what it's doing, and come up with some sort of answer, because this is not the answer. This is bad for everyone. Or we just keep going and people get used to it. But yeah, the corners are round. Oh well.